This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Crossfire. On the left, Tom Brayton. On the right, Robert Novak. In the Crossfire, Democratic Congressman Bill Nelson of Florida, a crew member of Space Shuttle Columbia's most recent mission. And Norman Baker, editor-in-chief of Defense Daily, and in Los Angeles, Bob Poole, president of the Reason Foundation.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. By now you know, and will probably always remember, what happened on this day. Of the grief of the day, the President of the United States has spoken for us all. Our guest tonight was a member of the crew on the last shuttle flight, landing just 8 days ago. As a congressman, Bill Nelson represents the Cape Canaveral district where today's brief journey began. Later on in this program, we'll talk to two authorities who differ on what the lessons of the journey ought to be. Bob?
Representative Nelson, what does this tragedy mean for the immediate and the long-range future of the space program?
Well, it certainly for the immediate means that there's going to be a break in all of the ambitious program for the space shuttle that was planned for this year. Very important missions that were to be launched. We simply have to find out what was the problem. And once the problem is found out, it will be corrected, and America's space program will go on, and the space shuttle will continue to fly. It's important that this country have assured access to space. And having ridden on such a machine and seeing its capabilities, it will fly again, and it will give us that advantage of going to and from space that only we on this planet Earth possess.
Do you think, sir, that apart from the need to find out just what happened, that there will be a loss of political support in the Congress as far as the funding, the willingness to fund the program goes?
Well, of course, I can't really answer your question right now, but my instinct is that no, there will not.
Congressman, you knew these people.
I did. I trained with them.
What do you think it was like up there? You were there. Did anybody ever say to you, did anybody ever say to you, look, Mr. Nelson, this is, as you know, dangerous. Did anybody ever say that to you? Or do you take it as a soldier takes it? You know it's dangerous, but you don't say anything about it.
Every member of the crew understands the risk. This is an amazing machine that has thousands, millions of parts. And everybody prepares for certain risk. These crews go into the simulators and train hundreds of hours with the trainers throwing malfunctions at them so that they can handle the malfunctions. But a malfunction as occurred today with this kind of tragedy, you don't train for that.
Do you think, Congressman Nelson, that with this tragedy there's going to be less inclination to put private citizens into space,
no,
to expose them to that risk?
No, I don't. I think that once we know what the problem is, we can correct it. Remember, in the Apollo program, we were going to the moon. On Apollo 13, we had an explosion en route to the moon. Fortunately, we were able to get our 3 Apollo astronauts back, and the moon Apollo program went on. They had several more landings. This, of course, is a much more tragic event, but I think we will find out what is the answer. We'll correct it. And I think the uniqueness of this shuttle transportation system is that it allows the ordinary citizen, such as Christa, or the journalists to be named in the future, to go into space and to convey that back to the American people.
But Congressman, I was talking to one person who's had something to do with the space program from the beginning, and he mentioned something that's bothered me today. He said you could do a lot of this without using people. Did that bother you at all?
No, you can't go into space and grow protein crystals linked to cancer research, as I did, without having the human in the loop. You can't go into space and try to work new wonder drugs through the electrophoresis process unless you have humans there to start the process. You can't go into space to put together human observations of Earth as well as the heavens without the human involved in it. You can try through the automatic process, but you can't go into space and repair satellites as we've done, almost miraculously, unless the human is in the loop.
The difference, Congressman Nelson, between what happened today and what happened 20 years ago when Gus Grissom and his crew died on the ground is that there was not a private citizen last time. What do you think that having a school teacher, a journalist, having a congressman like Bill Nelson on a space trip, having a senator like Jake Garn, what does that add to the space program in your opinion?
Well, in my particular case, I was extended the invitation and accepted to try to be the best chairman of the space subcommittee that I can be. And with what I've learned, with what I know about the system, I'm in a position now from that learning experience to offer that as we try to make decisions in the U.S. Congress. What Christa and the future citizens in space will offer is another point of view to convey to America just what America is all about as America tries to expand her frontier. And that's part of us. That's part of our psyche. That's part of our character, is that we always have a frontier to expand to. President Kennedy understood that. We understand that now, today, and that's why America's space program is going to continue.
Congressman, you have 2 children, and they watched today, I suppose. I'd like to know what you're going to tell them when you see them.
Well, that's where I'm going right now, to see my children. But my children understand that there was a certain risk that their daddy took. They understood that the likelihood was that there was not going to be any problem. Now, certainly no one in the space program has even fathomed the degree of the explosion and the tragedy that has occurred today. I wish I could speak knowledgeably with you as to what was the problem, but a lot of that evidence is at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and it's going to take us some period of time to put it all together.
All right, Congressman Ellison. I want to thank you very much for being our guest on Crossfire. As I mentioned earlier, when we get back, right after this, we're going to talk to 2 gentlemen who disagree about what the lessons of the journey, the brief journey, ought to be. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Crossfire. We've just talked to Congressman Bill Nelson, who was himself just a week or so ago in space. And now our 2 guests are Norman Baker, here in the studios, editor-in-chief of Defense Daily, who has been covering spacecraft since 1957, and out in Los Angeles, Bob Poole, president of the Reason Foundation. Bob?
Mr. Poole, you have been a critic of the government's space program, saying that the government shouldn't do it. Surely this tragedy does not in any way substantiate or detract from your arguments. Would you agree to that?
Well, I think this tragedy today should cause us to take a pause and look at the model that we've used for space development of centralizing everything in a government agency, NASA, and trying to have, in the case of the shuttle, a single vehicle be all things to all people.
Well, that was just the answer I was hoping you weren't going to give, Mr. Poole, because what happened today, we don't know what happened today, but I hope you're not going to use that as an argument for the privatization of space, because surely it could have happened under private means as well as government means.
Accidents certainly happen, and there was bound to be an accident with the shuttle sooner or later, no matter who developed it. But from an engineering standpoint, the more complexity you design into a system, the more likely it is that such accidents will occur.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Baker?
Well, I don't see how we could possibly go any other way, because at the present time, space is not a profitable venture. It's not something that the community, the industrial community, can go into, because there's no profit to be gained from it yet. It is something that must be developed. NASA, before it became the space agency, was an agency for developing aeronautical research for this country, and we needed them. And once they developed the research for us, then we'd turn it over to the industries, and the industries would build their aircraft. Well, NASA's performing that same function now and developing the space research that we need for building the vehicles. It's too early to say that this can be turned over to the industrial community, the business community.
But what about his argument that the complexity that is built into this as a public vehicle diminishes the safety factor? I've never heard that.
That argument, I think it's a very specious argument, because I don't know how they've tried their best to make this as reliable as possible, and I think they have demonstrated quite well in the flights that have gone before. I can't say that 24 flights and then a catastrophe is reliability, but when do you determine when something has reached a stage where it is safe to be utilized by everybody?
Mr. Poole, let me pick up on that. Do you think that we are rushing too fast, or that NASA is? And do you think that the presence on the craft of senators, congressmen, and in this just recent instance, a school teacher, is a good thing to do?
I think it was a tragic mistake, and I think the reason that it's done is simply to build political support for NASA's budget. There's no technical reason, certainly, why you would want to have civilians of this sort on these space missions by the 25th launch of the program. It's simply a matter of maintaining NASA's budget and building the necessary political support.
Mr.
I think that's quite unfair, and I disagree heartily with that, because the American space program is America's space program. It belongs to the American people. And how long are you going to keep them out? When are you going to determine that they can't enjoy the fruits of this thing? As Congressman Nelson was saying earlier here, he went there to be a good space chairman for his committee. And
well, his committee determines NASA's budget.
Well, certainly. I think
that's a good reason for them.
What better man could you send up there if the man is going to determine how much money NASA should have for its exploration of space, to determine if it's being well spent?
It sounds to me like a conflict of interest.
Well, I wouldn't think so. The Congress represents the people of the United States. And
well, but there is, you certainly would agree, Mr. Baker, there is a certain plus for NASA in sending up the man who's going to handle their budget, if he wants to go.
Well, then let's take the teacher that was going up today. How was she going to influence NASA's budget? She was actually going to have all of the future of our country watching her, and she was going to give lessons from space.
Mr. Poole, don't you know that the people in this country, I think even with the tragedy today, I think they have a spirit of adventure. They want to be on that spacecraft. It isn't a matter of getting congressional lobbying support. I think that's part of the American spirit. They want to take that risk.
Mr. Novak, I count myself as a lifelong space buff, and my heart is in my mouth every time one of those craft goes up, and I wish I were on board as well.
Did you put in an application?
I think the American people should get their money's worth out of the space program. And the way that NASA does it, trying to combine in one vehicle an orbiting space laboratory, a commercial space transportation system, and a military launch vehicle, results in design compromises and increased complexity, to the point where the cost per pound of into orbit today is higher with the space shuttle than it was under the Apollo program 20 years ago. And that's the result, this ridiculous complexity, that trying to do everything in one vehicle.
You mean
that is precisely the result of the political process of maintaining NASA's budget.
Mr. Poole, do you mean the actual space shuttle, or do you mean the manner of sending it up?
No, I mean the actual space shuttle. The cost of developing and producing and sustaining that program today, the cost per pound is over $2,000 per pound. The cost under the Apollo program was about $1,700 per pound.
Yeah,
and yet the shuttle was sold to us as a way of reducing the cost per pound down to about $100 a pound.
In real dollars, Mr. Poole?
In real dollars, in 1985 dollars, converting the Apollo cost to $1985 and using the $1985 cost today, that's absolutely right. The shuttle is a disaster from a design standpoint because politics drove the design.
Well, this is only the beginning of the space shuttle program. There's only been 24 flights. How can you say it is now time for them to make a profit or to be a cost-effective vehicle, as cost-effective as the earlier expendable rockets were? I think it's quite unfair to say that they've developed complexity in this vehicle. Actually, the school teacher could go into space in the same accommodation that a military man would go into space, or a civilian scientist would go into space. There was no
at a much greater cost.
Mr. Pohl, let's be realistic. If the government were not doing this, there would not be a space program. The private industry, as Mr. Baker says, would not find it profitable enough to make these experimental flights. You agree with that, won't you?
Well, I'll agree that private industry would not design and build a craft like the shuttle. That's certainly true. However, there's a very viable commercial market for launching satellites. The communication satellites is a multi-billion-dollar business, and that could be entirely handled in the private sector today on a commercial basis.
If it weren't for NASA, man out of space, would you not? This is what you're advocating, an unmanned space vehicle.
At this point in time, that would probably be the most cost-effective. That's right.
When will the time come that man can go into space?
I'm not sure. I think we have to allow innovation and technology to proceed and see when that is.
Well, I think, Mr. Pohl, you come from a sector of political opinion that would just about repeal the Defense Department. You would let the Soviet Union have the entire option on the man in space, and we wouldn't put anybody in space.
Not at all. I think there's potentially a military role for man in space in developing the Strategic Defense Initiative, for example, of which I'm a strong supporter. But I think that's a military function. I think NASA could well turn over to the Defense Department 2 of the remaining 3 shuttles and leave that as a strictly military program.
Mr. Baker, let me ask you what I'm sure you'll regard as a dumb question, but on this subject I'm not very bright. Why should we continue to try to put men up in space? Just what are the reasons? What are the reasons that make it to our national advantage?
Well, I have been reporting the space field since 1956-57, and I was a member of the American Rocket Society even before that. That's not an easy one to answer, but Congressman Ellison tried to answer it there a moment ago. America is a nation of people that have been nothing but pioneers. Your people and my people, we founded this country, and we wanted to go on those covered wagons.
I mean, it's like asking, why do you want to cross those mountains into California?
Exactly. Why did Congressman Nelson, or why did these astronauts want to go into space? Why did the teacher want to go into space? Why do any of us want to push out there to pay for this thing? And I think the American people are going to have to make the decision of whether we're going the right way or not.
Mr. Baker, you keep a very close eye in your publication on what happens to the defense program, the space program. Do you think that arguments such as Mr. Pohl's will be effective in cutting down congressional support for a space program as a result of today's tragedy?
No, they've been trying to do it before the Project Mercury program, the Project Gemini program, and the Project Apollo. We had the critics, very strong critics, that came over to Congress regularly, denouncing the Apollo program. After President Kennedy said, let's go to the moon, the clamor was unbelievable against the manned spaceflight program. They didn't stop it then, and I don't think they'll stop it now.
But now you have this catastrophe. You don't think that will fuel the efforts?
No, I don't think so. I think the American people are going to be behind this, just as the president was today. And he said, we will go on. How soon we can go on now until this has all been examined thoroughly, I don't know, but we will go on.
What would be your answer to that question, Mr. Pohl? Do you think today's events will halt or at least postpone future programs?
I think they will certainly postpone future civilians in space, definitely. And I think what we may be neglecting here is the presence of Graham-Rudman as well. The cost of continuing the space shuttle program as a commercial launch vehicle system, when each launch has to be subsidized by the American people to the tune of probably $100 million, is really a questionable item at a time of budget stringency. As part of a defense program, a scaled-down shuttle program, I think, could well make sense and might well be worth continuing.
The
commercial aspect, I think, really should not survive a careful scrutiny in terms of the federal deficit today.
The trouble I have, Mr. Pohl, speaking rationally, and I know you're an advocate of reason because that's the name of your organization, is how is your argument in any way enhanced by this terrible event today? I mean, it was either true before the event or untrue before the event. I can't see how the loss of these lives and this accident has brings any merit to your argument.
No, today's tragedy doesn't affect the argument per se. It may, because it means that we will pause and take a careful look at it, it may make it possible to take a more calm and rational look at just what are we getting for the dollars we're spending on the space shuttle program, which has really not been done up till now.
Well, I hope the calm and reasoned and rational look does not mean going backwards in the space program and calling a halt to the space shuttle program and putting civilians into space.
All right, Mr. Baker, Mr. Pohl, Bob and I want to thank you for being our guest on Crossfire tonight. And he and I will be back in just a minute.
Tom, the age of television in which you can see people killed, die a horrible death before your very eyes is a traumatic experience, but thousands of people we don't see die in plane crashes, in wars, in automobile crashes every day. This certainly should not impede the space program.
No, I don't think it should. I watched the family of the teacher. It was a terrible thing to see. I wish we didn't I'm not so sure we ought to see it. But anyway, this is a sad day, and it's a sad day particularly for 7 very brave people, and it reminded me of that poem of Stephen Spender's about, I think, continually of those who were truly great, who wore at their hearts the fire's center. Born of the sun, they traveled a short time toward the sun and left the vivid air signed with their honor. I think those people did that. From the left, I'm Tom Brayton. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, I'm Robert Novak. Join us again next time for another edition of Crossfire.